Hey guys, welcome to another Team of the Tournament. It's such a terrible name for a series, Mitch, like genuinely. I'm thinking of calling it Dream Team, but I don't know if that specifically like explains exactly what this is. And what this is me and Mitchman are going to go through all of the individual players that we liked and make a dream roster of the excellent performances we saw in Challengers 1 of Europe. And so you as an analyst now as well for Alliance, I guess makes it very interesting, doing the eye tests, scoring the stats. Like, how do you approach that, I suppose? I asked Banks last week with the whole management side of it. What about you as an analyst?
I mean, well, I'll say straight away for this series, I'm probably going to have to ban myself from picking Alliance players so we don't end up with a very predictable five-man to start it out. But yeah, no, looking back over these games, obviously it's always good to watch the VODs and take a look at how players are playing. I think that's like the most important element of it. But then stats will always point you in the right direction as well, right? You get a pretty good idea when someone's dropping insanely high ACS. They've got that KD up there. They got the damage per round. That there's someone that you probably want to keep an eye on and see exactly how them and their team are setting them up for success. So it's not always as easy as picking the highest fraggers, let's say, but sometimes you got to give them credit as well.
Yeah, at the end of the day, like there's other roles as well. Like breaches, you aren't necessarily going to have a huge 80-hour kills per round, but their assists might be out of this world, right? I guess we'll start in the same direction as we did last time, and that's typically with the Sentinel player. I'll let you lead to sort of pick your team, because I feel like with a lot of these, we're going to have the same answers. So you can almost give like the main nomination, and then I can just go over some worthy shout-outs, I suppose, or potential debates that we could have on who deserves to be locked in overall as the team of the tournament. So Killjoys, Cyphers, Sentinel roles, who caught your eye the most?
So what I'm going to have to say, and I don't think it's going to come to as any surprise to anybody, it's Chihuahua. This guy was unbelievable. I was going to make a little dog sound before I said that, like a Chihuahua, but it would have been terrible. I got to say, like, he really impressed me, not just because obviously he hit some insane shots. And I'm thinking back to Split as well, the last map that they played versus G2. NIP were struggling. This guy came out with some insane Sheriff one taps in a 2vx situation as well. I really enjoyed watching him for that flashy play style, but also the fact that he was just such a rock for this team, able to take NIP, hold down map control for them, and he made the right decisions. He wasn't overly aggressive, but he had the right timing in his mind when it's time to go forward, take a couple of peeks, a couple of kills, and then bail back to his side. And one of the few players that I see bringing a lot of value to the Cypher attacking side, but not necessarily with his abilities, just with his ability to run in and entry for the team and still find so much, really.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I think if you were to look at a map in particular that he just stole the show on, that Icebox game against G2, like, he typically defaults on legs on his own. Like, you'll have the rest of NIP going in one direction, he'll go in the other. And he just made Zeke's life living hell as he was trying to defend the A site, because he didn't know when Chihuahua was going to show up. He would play super aggressive sometimes, find a pick on his own, or he would just sit there and wait. And you could see that G2, Mixwell would have to come over just to check, because they were so paranoid that this guy was going to come out of nowhere. Genuinely, it was a good show. I think most people would know that this was capable of Chihuahua, right? Just based off of his previous record, speaking to the coaches and stuff. Most people knew that Chihuahua was always this kind of player that could do the things that we saw him do this week. But that was the first time that we really saw that lightning strike. And it struck with everybody else, right? Like Jaddy, Existence, even Korea had a really good showing. I had Chihuahua as my option too, but I do think that another worthy shout out is probably Dimasic. I thought that this was a really good debut from him. It's not an easy game playing up against Liquid as well. And it was certainly not on the same level of like individual show-off that we saw from Chihuahua. But in a game when you're having to try and deal with Liquid, especially with how defender-sided the maps were on both fronts, you really need to have a good showing. I know Mitch shouted out Cryptics last week in the Red Bull tournament. Banks even.
Banks.
Did I just say you? I'm just so used to pairing you two together that I was just like Mitch and Banks. But yeah, Banks said that about Cryptics like last week, how much of a standout he was. And considering that Dimasic went up against that and was on the winning side, was definitely a good showing for him.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Dimisic was a pain in the ass on Split as well for Alliance. So,
oh yeah, you played them. I forgot about that.
Yeah, that was really a learning experience. So, I definitely I would say Dimisic is a really nice runner up to that role. But for me, Chihuahua, man, the way, as you're saying on Icebox, we saw that side of him lurking over towards one side of the map, stopping Zeke from having the space that he is so used to being able to take whenever there is a hit anywhere else or a slower round. And then also on Split, we see him up the pace. We see him take a lot more of those early aggressive duels or trading out his teammate like Rhyme, who obviously on Split is going to be the first man going in. And Chihuahua's right behind him to provide that support. So I really enjoyed it. Overall, watching Chihuahua in this tournament, and he got enough clips out of us, I think, for Twitter. He had to cherry pick which ones to post.
What about an Omen controller player then? Because I don't think anybody necessarily showed up in the same way that Chihuahua did, or, you know, we're going to be talking about people like Element and Jaddy further on in the video, but I think for like a controller player, nobody really stood out. I think there were quite a few people that had a really good showing, as in consistent results. Like you look at Angel, for example. It's the same old with him, and he's just so good. But was there any other Omens that caught your eye, or Brimstones, that you were surprised at how well they played considering recent form? Or for you, is it just, you know, those consistent top tier players showing up yet again in this tournament?
So I had to go, and especially because we're building a roster here, I had to make the choice of going with Angel. Not only is he a standout Brimstone Omen, not only is he involved in so many early fights for his team, but you also have to take into consideration the fact that, and it will make sense as we flesh out my side of the lineup a little bit more, Angel has got so much experience at building up younger players. And I think even just with the Chihuahua that we've already seen, he would be able to tame this player into a whole new level of gameplay that obviously Chihuahua is currently getting on NIP having existence with him. But I think Angel would be a fitting replacement, putting him into that kind of controlling position. And it's been the case for a long time. He was he was known by us on the broadcast as the entry fragging Brimstone, right? And then I remember one day someone fell out of line on Twitter where they were tweeting out how their stats were amazing in a tournament, and Angel was second best to a Jet player, and he was like, "Yeah, try doing it on a Brimstone, baby. That's where the real work is done."
I think it was Trex, wasn't it, from Singularity that was
so.
Ex Singularity. Now he's on Honk, but insane player. Anyway, in any case, I again had Angel down, so now I'm more curious on who else to really mention, and I'm sort of going to let you choose who gets the runner-up spot, because really there's two that spring to mind. You've got Kriya from Nip, who seemed to unlock himself again, right? I think there's been a lot of criticism, rightly so, that he has fallen off a little bit with how good of a aggressive Omen he is. I think with the old roster with Safe on it and those kind of players and Looker, he kind of fell to the wayside a little bit, had to play a bit more passive. But in this team, especially when Nip play without a duelist, Kriya is the entry, right? He is actually playing a seriously aggressive playstyle. He, on the attack, will use the From the Shadows ultimate to teleport into the defender's spawn time and time again. He's just an utter nuisance, and again, Banks played him out last week because the potential was there, and with this whole Nip roster, it was fully realized you could literally put that whole Nip team on as a potential like team of the tournament, because everybody showed up and they needed to beat G2. And so I think he's a good shout out, but also considering the horrible start the Monkey Business had, I think Unko had a really good showing against Guild 2. Like some really good Omen, really good Viper as well, which is hard to adjust to so early on in your career. Like as an official broadcast team, I suppose it would be, you know, playing at the same level of these tier 1 orgs, and you're pulling out the Omen and the Viper and showing up on both of them. It was a good showing. Like, I was very critical of them beforehand, like you were, I know, but I think Onko responded really well to this.
Yeah, obviously my criticism was entirely based off of ego gone wrong, which was fantastic.
And AKM, so it wasn't like it wasn't Unko that was the problem.
Well, exactly,
right?
Exactly. But this is the thing, right? They bounced back. They showed their true form here, and I'm really glad we got to see them bounce back from the Red Bull performance. For me, I mean, look, if I had to go outside of Angel, I'd probably go Mystic, just because he's my boy. He captures my heart every time I watch him play. But Unko, out of those two, out of Kriya and Unko, I think he was just spectacular because he's filling in a lot of gaps for this team. When you look at how Monkey Business play, especially on Ascent, This was somewhere that consistently you would see Unko swapping up his position to allow for aggression on the other side of the map. So he's the one left with the tougher role, really. You know, when your jet player is pushing up with an operator, clearing angles and taking those aggressive peaks, but has the dash to get out of there, and you're left with the responsibility of playing passive on one side of the site. Sure, if they make noise, hey, you've got your paranoia, buy your team some time, get yourself back into a better position. But you're often just left there waiting for the engagement. And if they're coming at you with good spacing, man, flashes even, you're looking at probably 2 players coming at once. So Unko was in pretty tough positions a lot of the time, but he still made it work. And I think he has to get some big props for that.
What would the rest be? What would the rest of the team be? We've got our Sentinel, we've got our Controller. Would you have double Duelist and a Sova? Would you not have a Sova at all? Like, what is the lay of the land for the rest of this team in your mind, at least?
So I'll move next into a Sova, but it is a Sova flex that I'm going to pick up here. And I say flex because although typically he will be a Sova or a Sage, which is a little bit odd. Obviously, you'll have the Rays slot into that role when you come down to a lot of maps where Sova isn't as viable. He can also play a Duelist very comfortably. And I think he can play whatever the hell he wants if he was on my team. It is JD that I'd pick up next, making it 2 out of 3 NIP players so far. Really feeding off what you said there, Ryan, that we could basically just pick the NIP team. But Chihuahua and JD, it's like a 1-2 punch. You're bringing in these 2 young CIS players. They're absolutely fantastic and phenomenal. And I think the problem is, if you look at scoreboards, if you look at games or highlights after a game, you'll get the odd flank from Chihuahua, the 2Ks with the Sheriff. JD's just going to be in 90% of that video, though. And that's what most people are going to walk away with, is either the narrative of Existence being the best IGL and he's propping his team up. And I agree with it. Don't get me wrong. Or JD just being an absolute beast. So I felt like I had to put Chihuahua in there, give him the props, right? But JD as an individual, playing the Sage, he is phenomenal, getting his teammates back up into the fight, bridging the gap, I suppose, that some of these early fights, say you're against your Mixwell, who was insane for opening duels in this tournament so far in Challengers 1. That's somewhere JD comes into play. Obviously, his utility itself is immensely useful, but the most useful thing about JD is the fact that I'm pretty sure he's got an aimbot programmed into his wrist, and that's after months of careful study. It's the only way. He's utterly unbelievable as an individual player. So the fact that he is now making an appearance in a team where he's got an IGL who can form him into the god tier player that he has the skill set for, it's scary for Europe, man.
Yeah, he could certainly be like the player of the year on the rate that he's going at the moment for 2021 if he manages to keep up this form. The 80 ping king, and he's only 17 years old. See, the way that you mentioned it as being a flex is pretty interesting, because I had it as a Sova player and a flex. I had just the one like Duelist as an entry. Okay. I was going to say Tavik, because I think that, again, the Sova was really good from him. Even in the home ground game from Red Bull, where they played up against Liquid, Tavik did okay. He did passably okay is how I described it. And considering how poor that team looked on an individual level, I think passably good is a nice thing to leave with, at least after that series. But I think the response to come in and actually just dominate up in a game where they're playing up against Bonka, who is always going to put up pretty tragic stats, but that's because he's such a supportive player, and a lot of his impact is from his IGL in more than the actual impact on the Sova. But I do think that I'm going to change it up to a person that didn't actually play Sova at all. They played purely Sky, at least for the most part, and that was Nico for Wave. Like, that's a ballsy thing to do. I've seen Wave been doing it for quite some time. I think they did it through the Red Bull qualifiers, maybe a little bit in the level regional before Christmas, but I don't think so. But Nico is a really good breach player and is just a really tall order to go Sky full time. But he seemed to make it really work. We've seen her pick rate go up a little bit, and it's just a brave thing to sort of do. But I think that the reason why Muri especially showed up as well as he did is because he had that team support. I think Soulcast has been really good over on that agent as well, but that's map dependent when he plays that agent, right? It wasn't the case for Wave, and so I think that deserves a bit of testament, because he is a really good supportive player on the breach, but the fact that he was on the Sky, Wave went double Duelist with the Rays and the Jet, they can only do that based off the fact that he played the agent that was literally Sova and Breach rolled into one. So I'm going to say him. I'm going to change away from Tavik. I do think Tavik was one of the best Sovas out there. He did play it more than people like JD, for example, so that's why I kind of leaned more towards Tavik. But I think with what Nico brought to the table with the new agent, you have to give him credit there. What's left for you? Have you got like a jet and an entry then for the rest of your team?
Yeah, so little bit of a mix-up as well, because I'll say my next player. Do you want to do Jet next, or do you want to do our like entry?
You can do both
player?
of them. Like, what's the deadly duo?
Okay, sure. So what I'm going with here, my Jet, because I don't believe, first of all, in one-trick jets, your operator jet players. Sorry, Mixwell, out the window. And then the next thing I have to say is that on a team with Angel, it's not going to fly. It's not happening. Not at all. So I couldn't pick someone that's a jet operator. What I did pick, though, was Scream, because this guy is unbelievable on the jet. Now, okay, before we would make the argument that, say, Angel wants to play your Omen, Scream would come in, Cloudburst, whatever the second angle was. It's not as helpful now with it being a 4-second. I've heard some people say that, oh, it's only 4 seconds, so you can't really plug the holes. But if your Omen's quick enough, he throws out a smoke, your timing is there for the Cloudburst, he can get his other smoke into position before it fades, and it should be okay. So I think that's very viable. I think it's why we're still seeing Scream play it. And as well as that, this guy, mechanically, individually, it's disgusting. It's filthy. You get Scream, you get JD, you get Chihuahua on a team. Angel is an insane player that you could basically put in a duelist anyways. You've already got a hell of a stacked roster. And then my final one that I was putting in is a Sage and a Reyna player. You might know who it is already from that, because there's not too many that flex that way. And that would help with JD. They'd be able to interchange a little bit, mix it around. And it was Element from Monkey Business. Now, I didn't say Scream is from Liquid, but I think everybody knows that at this stage.
Point, yeah.
I'd be surprised if they didn't. Element on Reyna. Oh my god. I think it's 66 kills or 64 on 2 maps of Icebox back to back. The dude is unbelievable. Against some of the best teams in Europe. God's sake, it was against Guild in the one that we saw just the other day, and I couldn't believe my eyes when he dropped 31. And even then, there were some rounds that he got a little bit aggressive and he could have gotten even more from. So he was a sight for sore eyes, someone I wasn't very familiar with coming into the tournament, didn't expect very much from, having seen the previous performance at Monkey Business and Red Bull Homegrounds. And let's just ban Icebox against Monkey Business. I think it's a necessity.
Yeah. It's a terrifying thing. I had Element on my team too. I don't think you could really put anybody else in there, but I had him more as a flex option. But I had an entry, and that entry has to be Muri from Wave. Nobody had a better tournament than he did. And I think, yeah, you can look at Element with the kills that he racked up, but it was against Guild. Guild didn't look that great and haven't looked great since we've seen him come back with Safe. But Muri showing up, his stats across the tournament overall were pretty stacked. I do think the Wave did have an easy time to get to the qualifying stage, at least the challenges main section of it. But a 2-1 win over Fnatic, as they get announced, and Summon FC have always been on the tear, I think is down to him having an individual great game. And so really I was sort of keeping an eye on the stats, because obviously we can't see some of these games anyway, so you kind of have to look at the scoreboards and stuff like VLR.gg as an example. And it was just, you'd see Muri's name constantly right at the top. And so for him to come into a series where he's playing up against a top 5 team, I think you could say with Fnatic, and he still has that kind of performance, that's scary, because Muri was always the silver player for this team. So it does feel like they've put him on an agent now that he has been a locked on. He's been super consistent and super scary on this role too. And kind of going on to the whole initiator point with Nico, Muri doesn't work without Nico on that role, and I don't think Nico works without Muri, right? So you kind of have to put those two together. But then with Element as the flex player is how I would sort of put it together. It's very difficult. I think Element and JD, you could put them both on a roster kind of like you did, but their agent pools are fairly similar at least. And I think both of them benefit when they're left to be very flexible, which, as a bit of a sidebar before we get onto our 6th man, so to speak, what was your perspective on Safe? Because Safe is the player that we should be mentioning as being the flex pick, the one picking up all sorts of different agents. And he's been, as I put it, shoehorned onto Killjoy. What do you think about that? I feel as well, it's worth highlighting, it's very early days for Guild. Clearly they haven't set up anything at this point. They've just kind of gone, let's just go into the tournament and see what happens and what goes certain ways, I suppose. But for me, Safe on Killjoy just feels like a huge loss of potential for this team.
Yeah, from what I know about Safe, you watch him play, it's also, I guess he's got a similar style to Yassine in that when you let him loose a little bit, you let him kind of go out there and make the plays that maybe aren't the correct play in the moment, he can still pull back so much from that. He gets you so much value. When he's on a roll like that, I feel like this is somewhere that I'm not going to say Safe can't play, and I'm not going to say will harm him in the long term, but it's going to require a massive adjustment period to go from where Safe is normally given so much freedom to now being off raise and put onto, I mean, Viper is his most played agent currently, but put onto the Killjoy, your Cyphers. I wouldn't make that choice, but obviously they've got something behind the scenes that they're seeing that we're not. What I would say as a quick side note, I wanted to say while you were talking about Wave and Fnatic, it wasn't just the fact that they beat Fnatic, and it wasn't just the fact that obviously players like Muri were unbelievable, but they lost the first map 13-6.
Yes.
On Haven, they were on overtime. They got wrecked on Bind. Then Haven, it was overtime. There was a possibility, there was a moment where they were within a round of losing, of getting knocked out. And this team had the mental fortitude to turn around as one that hasn't made top 4, struggle to get even top 8 finishes or be around that level of team. And they come in after their boot camp and they're able to bounce back, win Haven, and then 13-6 split. That is unbelievable. And it blew me away watching them, because there was a point where I'm like, I don't think this team is mature enough like to actually survive under these conditions, right? The pressure they're under right now, they've probably never even experienced before on this level in Valorant. And then, geez, watching that comeback, it blew my mind and got my heart beating at least 3 times as fast as was healthy.
It was just an absolute terror. I do think the Fnatic kind of crumbled a little bit under the pressure, as is expected when a team gets signed. It's a whole different dynamic of mentality that they have to get used to. You know, the pressure was to get signed before. Now it's to stay signed, right? And that's going to be the goal for all of the teams going forward. But finally, we often offer a 6th man on the team just for those that maybe don't quite fall into certain structures on the team, a player that you would just have as an extra because they were so good. Who is that for you? Who is the other player that's worthy of being on this kind of team?
So if you look down through my roster so far, you'll notice that we have a Cypher, we have a Brimstone Omen, we have our Sova, we actually have 2 options for Sage really combined with that, and a Jet. The only flasher that I feasibly have is Element from Monkey Business playing as a Reyna. Now, I don't know how much people know about my preference on agents, but I imagine it's a decent bit, and Reyna as a flasher ain't something I'm a fan of, as much as I love Element on it. So my 6th man had to be someone that was able to take flashes out. Now, I would have picked Looker, but I'm banned from picking Alliance players, so I had to go with my man who's been flexing it recently. Now, yes, he's normally a Sova, but he showed us that he can play that Sky, and I wouldn't mind going down the wave route of letting him do it and explore those options. It was Solkus who I'm picking as my 6th player. It's also the fact that he's gone through a pretty tough time recently. I mean, a lot of the community were going after this guy, telling him he was a noob, telling him he shouldn't be playing professional Valorant after he had a terrible performance in First Strike. And what we've seen from him in the last month and a half has been some of the best Valorant that he has played, full stop. So this guy is determined. He's got a fire lit under him, and he was a damn good Sky. Fits into my roster pretty nicely.
Yeah, I had Jaddy down as mine because I failed to mention him, but considering how flexible of a player is, you could sort of slot him anywhere. I do think on the subject of flashes, there are 2 players that spring to mind, actually, just sort of having a quick look. Boaster. Boaster's form individually has been a huge improvement, because I think before, like in First Strike, you knew that he was the RGL, you knew that he was doing a lot of those calling in area, but mechanically, other than obviously the support utility that he used, when it came to like duels with mechanics and aiming, he wasn't all that. In fact, I think that was his weakest area more than anything as a player, just because, I mean, RGLs don't tend to get a lot of frags. His mechanics across that series against Wave were always really crisp, and he did get a lot of multi-kills, won a lot of clutches, and it was a good trend for him. But also Eccles, actually, on Breach, doesn't have bad stats at all, considering everybody's now calling for his head all the same. Yeah, he didn't get all that many kills, but his assists, he got a 63% assist per round rate. But that's not bad. That's better than anybody else in the tournament. And that is on, 77 rounds of breach? A good, decent amount of it, right? So he's doing a lot of setting up for his team. I think there's obviously a lot that Team Liquid could do on their attack because it was severely lackluster against FPX. But this is a team that I don't think deserve all of the negativity that they get. Even after this series, they lost to FPX, who right now looks like the best team in Europe after G2 lost to NIP. So you can't really rag on these guys too much. They lost to G2 and they lost to FPX recently. That's all they've lost to. Not a bad result by any stretch. And Heretics as well. So that's, top 3 teams that they've lost to. Everybody else, they seem to be comfortable with, right?
I have to say as well, if we're going down that route, obviously talking about putting Boaster on a team with Angel, that would be, I think, a dream come true for that guy. When he got that contract in the mail, his face would light up like nothing before. But I think Eccles and Boaster, they would be good to put in. My only gripe would be, I like the idea of having one IGL, of one guy. Like, you've got these other guys who have voices up there, and I'm almost scared we're going to go down a G2 route. You know what I mean? And that'd be somewhere that it's a side conversation, but G2 in the long haul, right now, obviously they brought in Zeke. People are thinking Zeke, he's coming into IGL. That's what his role is, right? Then we talk with Zeke and he's saying, no, everybody's IGLing still. He's doing most of it alongside Mixwell. The two of them call the most, but there is no structure, no IGL. And I think we lean on that a lot because coming from Counter-Strike, it's like, no, you need an IGL, guys. You have to. It's how this works. But in a game like Valorant, I think it's very feasible to have that kind of very loose calling because there's so much to keep track of, and it's not as I don't know how to put it, but not as grounded as Counter-Strike is. So with all that data floating around, I would like the idea of having a key caller, but the fact that all 5 players on the team are capable of making those calls is something that I would consider really valuable.
I'm actually going to change mine because I had Jaddy down, and I think that the IGL thing is an important one. But I am changing it to NIP's IGL. I think Existence had a great series. Like I said, everybody's worth a mention for NIP, but I think him in particular, I was nervous about seeing him move over to the Breach role after being an Omen main for so long, but he fit the role like a glove. And you can see that he maybe started off a bit anxious, I imagine, because this is probably the first time that he's ever called in English after being on French teams for so long, that he was going to be a bit quiet to begin with. But I feel like after a series like that, I imagine that he's warmed up, his confidence is going to be sky high, and I do think that whilst everybody on NIP played well, he is going to be the name that's often overlooked because he didn't frag out as hard as JD or Chihuahua did in particular, but I still think that his impact was pretty huge. So I'm going to have him as my 6th man instead. But now we need to decide overall. I think the easy ones are Chihuahua was definitely the best sentinel of this tournament. I think other than that, though, it's really hard to debate. Oh, yeah, we both agreed on Element, so that's a shoo-in for sure.
Yeah.
But Omen Brimstone, I think, yeah, Angel, I don't think he had, the hugest individual performance. I mean, he did against Raise Your Edge. He was just fragging out on those guys like nobody's business. But I think that game against Team Liquid, he just put in a solid performance. And really, with games like that, if you fail to do it, that's where the mistakes start to come in. So I'll agree on Omen and Brimstone for Angel. I guess it's Muri versus Scream as the entry player. That's a difficult one to break down, really, because I think that Muri deserves it more because his team actually qualified for one.
Yeah, okay, I'll give it to you. I'll agree with you there because Muri was someone I had my eye on anyways. The reason I didn't go for them was because I feel like Wave, I don't know how they'll perform long term. It's whether they're going to be able to consistently put up these figures versus big teams. They could do it versus Fnatic, but if they come up against your FPX, your G2s, do they have what it takes? I don't know. I'm not saying they don't. I'm saying I don't know that they do. Whereas someone like Scream, I know he can compete at that level. So that's where I was coming from. But Muri, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Let's throw him in.
I think it's with this kind of thing anyway. It's just it's more of a documentation, I suppose, of who showed up when, right? I think everybody knows Scream's going to be a top 10 player at the end of this year. You just
Always
have that feeling that he's always going to be up for a shooing of being, HLTV's number one. But Muri, I think, considering how well they did, it's just it's an extra award, I suppose, more than anything. So, yeah, we'll throw him in. It's just Nico versus... I think JD, honestly. As much as I like Nico and what he was able to do, JD, yet again, is worthy of a nomination for doing this work. But I guess that means that Soulcast would be the sixth man, which is something I don't... Oh, no, sorry. Existence versus Soulcast, then, as, like, the extra player.
See, here's the thing. If especially we're talking sixth man, I know Existence is not one of these people that's like, well, I'm an IGL, so I'll talk over you or anything like that. I also know from talking to him a lot, we had a bunch of conversations going back to when he was just before he signed with NIP, that he was comfortable playing anything. I know he'd obviously played a lot of Omen, that's where he was tested, but he was telling me, like, doesn't matter, your Breach, put me on there. He said, as long as it's not a Killjoy or a Cypher, he will play it, whatever the team needs him to be. So as far as a sixth man goes, or even a fifth man to fill a roster out, he's the one that you're going to want, because that, well, as long as Chihuahua turns up on the day, you can swap anyone else out with him and he'll fill that role and probably do it better than 99% of those players out there.
So our overall team, because I know that you can't see this as well, is that we have Chihuahua as the Sentinel, which will surprise nobody. Angel as, I guess, the main IGL as well as the Omen Brimstone. JD as the Silver, more flexible player. Then you've got, well, basically JD, Muri, and Element playing whatever the hell that they want at this point, right? Which is a scary trio of people that are going to be attacking. And then there's an extra Existence as, potentially a Breach coming in, or just an extra voice on the team, or even a coach at this point as well. Like, there's a lot that this man can provide. You happy with that team?
I'd be happy to put them in the next qualifier, that's for sure.
There's no double elimination, which is a shame.
Yeah.
That would
or
just
be a
add
one.
like I imagine G2, if they got knocked down to the losers bracket, would still qualify for this Challengers event. I still think that they would be a top 4 team in all honesty. However, we don't have that luxury, but at least we get to see a cool testament of how deep this roster pool is for this region overall. Even just the 8 teams that we really saw mainly on broadcast, how good they are. And we never saw Alliance because they ran into like FPX. Entropic got beaten out. Heretics barely made it through the qualifiers as is, right? There's half a dozen, even a dozen teams that you could mention that we could see here definitely for Challengers 2. But that's going to do it for Challengers 1. Any final thoughts that you want to say, seeing as you casted the event, and just about Europe after we saw a good glimpse of what they have to offer?
I want to say it's a breath of fresh air, I'll be honest. And this is, Carlos, don't come after me, bro. I love to see G2 not winning, not because of G2 or the players or anything. I love those guys. I've got my G2 underwear on the way. But the difference is, it's nice for Europe to have this event to event. We don't know who's going to take the top spot. Now, sure, Heretics went out in the BO1s. It sucks. It's the way things go. But when we got to the BO3s, you still have upsets. Like Fnatic losing to Wave, I didn't think that was going to happen. Most of Europe didn't think that was going to happen. I got a Pearly Age tweet because of it. Thanks a lot, Wave. But the fact that we have this diversity and this depth to Europe now is something that we've been saying was there for a long time. And now people are starting to step up to the plate and show that it's not going to be one team. It's not going to be 2 teams, but we've got so much, because I was worried that First Strike was going to be a flash in the pan, right? We get 2 teams that weren't pinned as the number 1 and number 2 teams coming into the event in the finals and made it there a pretty respectable way. It's beat G2, your FBXs, to get to where they got to. So when it was Heretics and Summon, I was like, please, let this happen again. Let this be the way things go, that I'm not going, who's playing against G2 in the final? Or rather, who's losing against G2 in the final? Now we have an exciting narrative building up as we move into the next stage of Challengers and Masters, and I'm just so grateful to get this fun story for EU to now pursue.
Definitely. We'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much for watching. You can check out all of Mitch's details below, and be sure to tune in when we get Challengers 2, which I think is in like 2 weeks and that, right? So it's not quite weekly like North America is. And we'll leave it there. So tune in a couple of weeks' time for the next one. Maybe we'll get Hypoc on or somebody, who knows. But that's going to do it for now, and we'll see you hopefully soon. Take care.